George Washington was probably one of the most important people in American history. He was the first President of the United States. He was the commander of the Continental Army, President of the Constitutional Convention, and he was one of the Founding Fathers. These accomplishments exemplify the bravery, leadership, and courage George Washington showed during his lifetime. George Washington was born on his family's plantation in Pope Creek, Westmoreland Country, Virginia, on February 22, 1732. His parents were Augustine and Mary Ball Washington. George Washington was the eldest of 6 children: George, Elizabeth, Samuel, John, Charles, and Mildred Washington. Around 1734, the Washington family moved up the Potomac River to another Washington property, Little Hunting Creek Plantation, which was later renamed to Mount Vernon. In 1738, the Washington family moved once again to a farm named Ferry Farm, which was a plantation on the Rappahannock River by Fredericksburg, Virginia. This is where Washington spent most of his childhood and his youth. Unfortunately, his father died when Washington was 11 years old, leaving him with the responsibility to take care of his family. Unlike many, President Washington never went to college or had a formal education. His older half-brothers, Lawrence and Augustine, attended Appleby Grammar School in England, but after the death of George Washington's father, his family had limited funds for his education. He got his education by private tutors and perhaps a local school in Fredericksburg. This was the only formal education George Washington and his siblings would receive. In addition to the basics of learning, Washington studied geometry and trigonometry, which prepared him for his first career as a surveyor. But before the age of 16, President Washington copied out the 110 rules and the rules of civility and decent behavior. Considering the fact that he was so young, he already had accomplishments that would help him in his later life. In the fall of 1753, 21-year-old George Washington was sent to deliver a message to the French, demanding that they leave the area. Nowadays, this journey is known as the Allegheny Expedition. He hiked for many days through snowy woods. He fell off a raft into the ice-cold Allegheny River, nearly drowning, and he had to spend a very cold night on an island with no shelter to stay covered in. This daunting journey was 900 miles long. The very first time George Washington ran for office, he lost, but he won in his second race and served in the Virginia House of Burgundy from 1758 to 1776. In 1789, the Washingtons became the first family. One of George Washington's most significant quotes was, "If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter." In 1775, the Revolutionary War began, having Congress commission Washington to take command of the Continental Army. For much of the remainder of the war, George Washington's most important strategy was to keep the British bottled up in New York. President Washington was collectively chosen to govern over the Constitutional Convention, which took over 4 months. "My wish," he wrote, "is that the convention may adopt no temporizing expedients, but probe the defect of the Constitution to the bottom and provide a radical cure." Once the Constitution was proved, the first presidential election was held. George Washington received a vote from every elector. He still remains the only president in American history to be elected by the constant voice of the people. President Washington served 2 terms as president. His first term was from 1789 to 1793, which was occupied primarily by organizing the executive branch of the new government. His second term, from 1793 to 1797, was dominated by foreign affairs and marred by deepening partnership in his own administration. Sadly, on the night of December 14, 1799, President George Washington passed away. But in his will, Washington left directions for the emancipation of all slaves that he owned. I chose President George Washington because his character, strong leadership, and his vision to spawn our great nation inspired me. My hope is that the foundation he laid for America many years ago will continue to be modeled by future presidents for generations to come.